Welcome to SciTech Culture with Steve Kern and Ben Warner, where we examine science, technology, and culture in the 21st century. Visit our website at scitechculture.com.
Hello and welcome to SciTech Culture. My name is Ben Warner and I'm joined once again by my good friend and colleague Steve Kern. How are we today, Steve? Interesting times, shall we say. We're obviously hit stage 4 level of restrictions now because of the coronavirus pandemic, but we just have to keep trucking on until those numbers get driven down.
Well, that's right. Of course, there's stage 4 restrictions in Victoria, Australia. The rest of Australia is probably only about 3 weeks behind.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. I'll overlay some photos while we're talking right now. Just some that I took this morning of the empty streets of Melbourne, and as we were saying before we got on, normally these streets at that time of the morning that I took them are usually like that packed full of cars and people. And to see it completely empty of all activity is quite the sight to see.
Well, the good news is that with it being empty, those case numbers will go down over the next 3 to 4 weeks and hopefully get back to a very manageable number.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so we're going to go back to a familiar topic, Donald Trump, which we've covered many times this year and in previous years, obviously.
It's been 5 years of fun, Ben.
Absolutely, but we're going to focus on this interview that he had with Jonathan Swan at Axios. And the reason why we're picking on this, apart from the fact that it stirred a whole lot of interesting sound bites and memes and whatnot because of the way Trump came off in this particular interview compared to, say, the run-of-the-mill ones that he's done all the last little while, is that what was interesting about it, I thought, was that this was probably the first time that a journalist basically found a way, not necessarily to make Trump accountable, but to catch him out at his own game, it's what you'd expect to see, like in terms of the types of responses you get and that sort of thing from an interview. But it was interesting to watch Trump sort of being on the back foot in a scenario like that, because regardless of what you think of him, the guy knows how to control a media response, and he didn't seem to be on his game in this particular one.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we had the first crack in this sort of facade a few weeks back when he had that interview and he tried to claim that America was doing really, really well. And he got beaten down by the Fox journo, which was interesting in itself. But he didn't, if you remember that interview in particular, he didn't have any details. And I think for whatever reason, he's showing up at this interview with the details, if we can call them that, and really come unstuck.
Yeah, well, that was the interesting thing. I mean, I think that was probably the most publicized part of the interview that kept getting repeated over and over again, where, they were between Jonathan Swan and Trump, they were like swapping, paper charts of this, that, and the other in terms of case numbers, and arguing how data should be interpreted, and how, Trump arguing that we're doing great, but, and Jonathan Swan saying, no, America's the worst in the world, and this sort of combative thing. So I don't want to necessarily go over that again because that's been well publicized, but there was one component in the interview that I thought was really interesting, which talked to this, which I think is what threw Trump off, is that there was a point where Trump was talking about his ability to draw crowds and et cetera, and Swan did an interesting thing. He actually praised him to his face, saying, I'm not criticizing you at all. You have an awesome ability to attract crowds. You're a crowd generating machine. There's absolutely no problem at all with any of that. And you could see Trump's whole demeanor changed. And obviously he was like, oh yeah, of course, that's what I am. And it got him on the back foot. And then Swan hit him with whatever it was that came after it and threw him on the back foot. And I thought that was interesting. Like, it's sort of like a carrot and stick approach, where effectively, he got him. He sort of lulled him in a false sense of security, and then he hit him. And I wonder, and I wonder though, like, given how the trajectory of the rest of the interview went, that potentially might have been a potential strategy in terms of interviewing Trump that journalists can use.
Well, yeah, it's actually one of Trump's favourite tactics anyway, is you throw out a negative, positive, negative, and, put the opposition off balance. And, it's interesting, probably after 4 years of feeling pretty much hectored by journalists, that may have been a masterstroke, because it's one of the few compliments I think anyone from the press has given Trump.
Yeah, absolutely.
In an interview in 4 years, and you're probably right. It probably probably played a trick on Trump and softened him up for the onslaught.
Exactly. The interesting thing though too was at the end of it, Trump said he was happy with the interview, and what it turned out that why he was happy with the interview is that ahead of the interview he said to Swan, look, whatever you do, you've got to make sure that the interview is not edited. I do not want to be edited. I don't want to be turned into, taken out of context or whatever. And Swan just said, yeah, okay, we'll make sure that it's not. I mean, obviously it was edited, so there was different camera angles and stuff. But I think the impression was to give the feeling of an uninterrupted interview. And then, he. It proceeded to work against him in a way, because it just kind of showed him what it was. But then Trump was like, no, that's exactly how it was. I wasn't edited, so I'm fine with it, which was, I guess it's to say not to be surprised by anything Trump says, really. But I was a little surprised by that, only because it seemed like he was put on the back foot a lot, and he might not have been happy about that.
Yeah, but his thing is that he'll never let on when he is unhappy with something like that, because for him that shows a sign of weakness. So he turns weakness into strength and strength into weakness, and will do and say anything to serve his own goals. So even if he put in a poor performance, he'll say straight afterwards, well, that was fantastic, I did well. And then, if he needs to, 24 hours later, he'll say it was the worst interview ever and blame it on the journalist.
Yeah, exactly.
So he's very hard to pin like that. So who knows? I mean, do you think he's under pressure? I mean, one of the things is Trump's been under immense pressure for his whole 4-year term.
Yeah.
And, to be honest, he hasn't shown like that it's affected him at all. In fact, he's at times, I think, relished it. So it's hard to know, but if he's been like that for 30 years, well, maybe that's just the way he is.
Yeah, and I guess what's interesting, beyond the interview is if you feed that into how he's coming across, and we're only a couple of months away from the election, etc. How that's all sort of playing into how he's going. The thing that I wanted to throw in here as a side note was Alan Lichtman, this history professor that has been following U.S. elections for a long time, and has apparently accurately predicted the outcome of every US election since 1984 through a system he's called the 13 Keys, which is not related to polls. It's a whole other set of standards that he is actually applying to it. He's saying Trump will lose based on this system that he's got, and that's what his prediction is going to be for 2020. Obviously, he keeps saying, as a caveat, it's not always, something that necessarily will, be a fait accompli, but he's got a pretty good run so far of predicting every election, with the possible exception of 2000, where he actually predicted Gore's victory, but he still stands by his prediction because the Supreme Court decided that one.
Oh, jeez. Well, okay. Okay. Well, that's not really an unbroken run. The other thing I'd say is that anyone who thought that a system that had worked for the previous 36 years would work in 2020 is very brave as well. This is an exceptional year. I don't think I think all bets are off. I mean, for what it's worth, I think Trump is behind, and I think that's primarily because of his handling of COVID has really exposed him in the US. But I will say this, and obviously I don't live in the States and I don't follow their politics that closely, but I haven't seen a lot of Biden.
Yeah.
Biden appears very, very distant, whereas Trump is always fronting up to the cameras, good, bad, or ugly, or even worse than that. He's still showing up. And I think that that presence, the closer we get to polling day, will allow him to probably activate voters as we get closer, which is kind of what happened last time. So if Joe Biden falls into the same trap as Hillary Clinton, he could find himself in the situation. So I guess maybe that's the only thing I'd say is maybe that's where 2016 and 2020 are similar in that it's Biden's election to lose, but I don't know that Trump can do it this time. But I would never say never.
Yeah, well, like as you said, anything can happen. But there's also maybe another point to consider too is making like all this commentary around, like they're looking at 2016 and trying to find a prediction for what will happen in 2020 and saying that, well, Trump was able to do X, Y, and Z in 2016, so, he could do it in 2020. But it's I heard an analogy put out there. It's a bit like, like say a sporting team that was down and they just got across the finish line and won the game, last week. And then it would be a mistake to think that they could just replicate the same performance the following week, let alone 4 years later, if we're taking that analogy to that extent. There's nothing to say that Trump could replicate what he did in 2016. But likewise, you could also say that there's nothing to say that Biden would end up suffering the same fate as Clinton. It could be all over the shop. You just don't know how it could end up turning out.
Well, that's the right response. I mean, because when it comes to data, you can't base data on a single set. The more data you have, then obviously the better it is, in terms of making a prediction. It's interesting, Trump won what everyone thought was an unlikely victory. But the reality is we might see him win another unlikely victory for a different set of circumstances this time around. And, then at least you'd have two data sets to look at and compare. So I wouldn't write him off. Personally, I can't see how he can win because I think COVID has really damaged him. And I can't see how he can possibly get more votes because he needs more votes than last time, I think, to win. But having said that, all it takes is one stumble from Joe Biden or, just something not falling into place for the Democrats, and it could all turn out very ugly for them again. And if there was one weakness, I think that'll really tell for Biden will be his age in the last 4 weeks, 4 or 5 weeks of campaigning. We'll see.
Well, at the very least, it's going to be an interesting election season, like it always is, I guess. It'll be, and I think, it's telling. It's almost like Biden's ability, I guess, to stand up, I guess, more than anything else.
Stand up and do more than just wave.
Yeah, exactly.
You've got to say something that means something.
Exactly. But contrast that with Trump's inability to label the coronavirus pandemic as fake news, which was clearly not something that he could do.
And I think that's really what's made him look very foolish.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Steve, we might wrap it up there, and we'll see how it all goes. I'm sure we have, there's still another 4 months or so. I'm sure Trump's got a few more zingers left in the locker somewhere.
Well, that's it. Yeah, it's less than 100 days now to the election, so every day counts.
Absolutely. All right, so don't forget our website, SciTechCulture.com. You can get all of our links and content there. You can subscribe to our YouTube and Vimeo channels, our RSS feeds, and watch us on any and all of your devices. And we greatly appreciate your visits to our website. All right, so that's it for this episode. We'll catch you next time.